But
Mm.
essentially, what this is about is the parole board met on October 3rd, a panel of it, and concluded that it believes that it is safe to release Jeffrey Gafoor, the real murderer of Lynette White, because they think that the public safety is going to be okay and that he can be managed within the community that he's released to. What do you think about the decision to release him?
Well, from what I've been following, I'm certainly stunned and a little bit outraged that the family and the public didn't have more input into this decision. I would certainly hope that they acted within the best interest of the public's safety and their experience and knowledge to allow for this release of this man. Um, but I am stunned that again the public was not more involved and allowed to be involved by them. That was more in secretive, almost like a predetermined decision. I hope that they carefully considered it and weighed all the evidence, and that the public will be made aware, and that the public could still have a possible input if there are some things that might have been considered. Again, it's all about the public safety, and did they do the best job possible, and should the public been more and better informed?
What has happened with this particular case is, as you probably know, I was among those who was trying to get this hearing in public, and it meant that certain information was put in the application to have it made public. And in the case of the other two, it should be okay because it just says they are relatives of either Lynette White or one of the Cardiff Five. So it could be anyone within that. In terms of me, it should be pretty obvious it was me, if you get what I mean, depending what information they have given. And what I'm a little bit concerned about personally is I don't know what the parole board has told Jeffrey Gafoor and his lawyers. So even if it doesn't name me, it may well be pretty obvious from the information that has been disclosed, and
Sure.
that this potentially puts me at risk. So my point with this is it would not have changed what I did. I would still have basically highlighted everything, written what I've written, and I don't apologize for doing that. But I should have been able to do it perfectly safely. And this raises the question now of if journalists who investigate in the way that I did and expose things in the way that I did are treated like this, with their safety potentially being
Mm.
put at risk, what does that say to journalists in
Well,
terms of investigating these things?
that's very concerning because that might limit their ability or even their desire to even investigate something that is critically important to the public. I think journalists should certainly be free of any fear of retribution, um, because of a good, honest reporting, investigating work. That this is about public safety. This is certainly something the public interest. Um, I'm curious: is this man going to be released now, completely on supervised? Is there some things that he has to report into, or is he just free to go and roam wherever he cares?
He will have to comply with license conditions, which will be fairly strict. So they will be keeping an eye on him if he is released, and he does have to comply with it. But you have these examples where people were released on parole, they were released into secure accommodation, and they had conditions they had to meet. And yet you can, unless you can actually keep track of somebody 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, you can't guarantee. There
Yep.
was a recent case where a person committed a terrible murder of a pensioner. She was 67 years old. He spent over 3 decades in prison. He comes up before the parole board, fools them into believing he is safe to release and has rehabilitated. But he had the desires still there, and the desires were to sort of attack and
Yeah.
basically commit horrible crimes. He did it within 5 months of his release.
Mm.
He's now back in prison, but he will come up for parole again. So that was something that they had strict licensing conditions that he had to comply with. He found a way around it. And this is the one of the big problems, that you cannot guarantee that it will be safe to release somebody, even if they do all the courses, tick all the boxes,
Mm.
appear to be completely rehabilitated. Some people will be, some people will not go on and commit any further crimes. And, it would be wrong that they do not get released. But the problem is, if you are dealing with public safety, you have to be as secure in the knowledge that this person is not going to reoffend as you can possibly be. And the problem is, you can never be 100%.
I absolutely agree with you there. I mean, again, having spent years with maximum security inmates, there are some people that are just almost unreformable, if I can say that. And granted, as you say, we want those people that are legitimately served their time, have changed, so to speak, and are not a threat. But how can we confirm that and verify that? It is nice that they will have a little bit different additional supervision upon release as compared to just being released free. But as you say, it's not a guarantee that the public it will be you remain safe and that that person is absolutely adaptable and able to adjust back into public life.
In this particular situation, what came out in the application to try to get this heard in public was that Mr. Gafoor had a recent diagnosis for ASD,
Mm.
and that's autism spectrum disorder. But it does not appear that the parole hearing has taken into consideration what effect, if any, that will have on his future behavior. So I have been saying, and I'm not the only one, that we would like to know how you are actually saying it is safe to release this person if you haven't considered this.
Yeah, good point. I mean, was it doctor certified? Was he reviewed by doctors? Was it a number of expert? Was it one that was provided by his own attorneys? I mean, just who exactly made that diagnosis and what potential side effects or future problems could arise having being diagnosed with such a condition?
Very, very good questions. Unfortunately, the answer is they haven't told us. We
Hmm.
don't know who made the diagnosis. We don't know on what basis the diagnosis has been made. We don't know what treatment is being provided. We basically don't know anything about it. And we are very, very, very concerned about it. A number of people are,
Certainly.
because you have this, which is a very, very serious thing. And it also raises the question of how, in 21 years in prison, this man was not diagnosed earlier than this,
Yeah.
and treatment was given for it. Now, that's not to say it's totally impossible for the symptoms not to manifest themselves until now. It's possible, but it still is something that you want answers to. And they really have to provide reassurance that ASD is not going to affect his future conduct. They basically were saying that we can't have the hearing in public because if we do, it could trigger his ASD, and he can react to that. Now, if you are affected by ASD to such an extent that you
Yes.
cannot have a public hearing, then how on earth can you be allowed out in public?
My goodness, that's a terrible excuse for not to have a public hearing on this situation. And you're absolutely right. That needs to be diagnosed by somebody, that testified before that group. Where did their information come from, or did they even were they even considering it or concerned about it? Certainly stunning development there. And again, I'm not familiar with that type of disease or affliction. Is that something that's relatively new in the medical field, or is this something that's been studied for years and years and years?
It's known about, but people haven't really said a great deal about it. So it's a little bit in a new area, and
Sure.
the effects of it would be new. But that is all the more reason why this should have been dealt with in a much more open fashion, because we need to know. If you're going to release him, we need to know what the effect is going to be, or likely to be. You can't say it's going to be, because people may be different.
The
But
possibilities.
yeah, but we basically need to know how he reacts,
Yeah.
especially as among the things that have been said in previous parole applications is he doesn't have empathy with his victims.
Uh-oh. Again, that's very concerning, and again, that's a psychological issue that might not ever be treatable, that's a permanent condition and could certainly lead to incidences out in public that would be detrimental to the public safety and individual safety.
What they have said, which is different from the previous applications, is that he has been tested in the community. That is, that he has had temporary releases. He hasn't done anything to warrant it being revoked and sent to back to closed prison conditions. He
Sure.
hasn't done anything violent within prison, as far as we're aware, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
Mhm, mhm.
This is a unique case on the basis of this man's crime and his behavior is so unpredictable that you have to worry about it. And by that, I mean, he commits this murder, which is a sexually motivated, utterly grotesque and brutal murder, over 50 stab wounds to
Jeez.
the victim. And that was his first offense. He wasn't arrested for anything previously. He didn't have mental illness issues or treatment for it. And then he goes quiet for the next 4 years. There's an attack on a work colleague with half a brick, which is roughly 4 years after the murder of Lynette White. And then he's quiet again for the next 11 years. Now, how on earth are you supposed to predict this kind of
Yes.
behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that's a history that is definitely concerning, and it's not a I don't see it as predictable that it obviously it must be anger issues, not being a doctor or diagnose anything, but it always sounds like that's extreme anger issues. That's almost to the point of being uncontrollable. And that's a threat to the public safety.
Mm. Well, that's one of the things that they did say in each of the previous parole applications, is that he does have anger issues, and that they're looking at how he's controlling his anger and things like that. But one of the things I object to is the parole process is such that the Secretary of State for Justice will have a dossier compiled, which will consist of his offence, what he's done, how he's behaved in prison, basically the works. You'll get psychological assessments, all sort, probation officers' reports. And in this case, the dossier is over 1,000 pages long.
Oh,
And my question with all of this is, they then say, if you want to object to the decision, you have to show that it was unlawful, irrational, or provide new evidence. How are you supposed to do that when all you get is 3 pages, which is, this is our summary of what has happened in the parole application? That is supposed to be 1,000 plus pages summarized in this, plus the parole hearing itself and what came out in the parole hearing, the decision and the reason for the decision, everything in that shorter space of time. And then you're supposed to challenge it on the basis of this small amount of information.
Oh, it certainly seems like they don't want it to be challenged. I mean, that's incredible. That's like just read the headlines and don't look for the small words or a contract that has the fine print at the bottom. That actually is the most critical part of that 1,000-page report. It's hard to imagine could be condensed into 3 pages and actually have substance and value that people can make a good, clear decision about whether this is a, 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 a safety issue, whether this was done in clandestine meetings or whether this was actually and rightfully researched and carefully considered before they made that decision. It almost sounds like a rush to release and keep the public out of it, which again is the most scariest thing we can have when our justice system is pushing people out there and not allowing the public to have input, because it's the public where they're going to be, living in and acting around, and especially somebody convicted of such a horrendous crime with obvious uh, mental and anger issues that could apparently erupt at any moment.
One of the 5 men who were wrongly accused, he wasn't convicted. His name is John Actie. And he put out a call asking for legal representation because he wanted to contact the parole board and ask them to reconsider. And he got that. His lawyer, whoever it is, has submitted something to the parole board calling for reconsideration. One of the relatives of Lynette White is also doing that, or has done so, and there are other people who are doing it. I will be doing it. I haven't done it yet because I've also got to make a complaint about the whole process and deal with the legal issues of the process as well. But I have made a call for people, if they feel unsafe from this decision, to contact the parole board and ask them to reconsider. What do you think of that? Do you think that's worth doing or not?
Oh, I would highly encourage that. Again, anybody that has the right to petition the courts for a hearing, anybody that has that given right there, I would hope that's familiar with this case or want to learn more about the case would actually file for that request. It sounds like it's something that this again could affect them, their loved ones, somebody in their life. And again, part of it is also too to keep our government from covering up certain things, to make our government, as they say, more transparent, to make the government more aware that the public needs to have access in these when you're making these critical decisions that affect their safety.
The good news, at least up to a point, is that the current Secretary of State for Justice, she came in after the recent general election, immediately asked her officials to have a look and see if this can be referred to the parole board to ask them to reconsider, because she has the power to do it.
Good.
But she has to do that within 3 weeks of the decision. And similarly, all efforts to ask them to reconsider have to be done within 3 weeks. This obviously means that the public who ask for a reconsideration will not know if the Secretary of State's request, or if she does decide to send it to the parole board, will happen by the deadline, because the deadline is exactly the same.
Wow. I would hope that all the victims' families are at least pressuring her. Certainly, those that were wrongfully accused of the crime, would pressure her, and that she is well aware of this issue and the time restraints, because obviously that's critical to get that filed with allotted time. And certainly, I would hope that maybe some media coverage, somebody in the media there would be able to put it out to the public. Again, I'm sure that everybody is able to contact her and leave a message saying that that's what they request, and hope that she would file for that.
To be fair, I don't think we need to do that, because she's already, without asking, has contacted her officials and asked them to review this case to see if there are grounds to send it to the parole board to ask them to reconsider. So I don't think you need to put pressure on
Wonderful.
her. It's
Wonderful.
simply a case of the parole board needs to take another look at it, because I mean the the thing that makes this so stupid is I'm not even saying it's the wrong decision.
Yeah.
It might be the correct decision, but we can't possibly know it's the correct decision because they've done this behind closed doors.
Yeah.
And this is completely and utterly wrong. If you want public to engage with the parole process, to understand it, and to be supportive of the parole board and its actions, it has to know what is going on. You have to inform them and inform them properly, which unfortunately is not happening. So there will be a situation where it won't happen in time to sort this case out, but there has to be substantial changes in the parole system and also in the criminal justice system on how you
Yeah.
hold these people accountable for their crimes, because it's not simply a case of lock them up, throw the key away until you decide to release them. You need to know what's going on with these people, how you are going to rehabilitate them, if you can rehabilitate them, because you could end up having a sentence and a life sentence and a tariff which looks okay, but it actually isn't,
Yeah.
because inside the people are damaged further because they're not getting what they need, and the public is not getting what they need because they don't know what's going on. So I will be sort of demanding further changes later, and my book, when it comes out, which will either be at the end of this year or early next year, is going to be exposing this whole situation. That said, we still have the situation of you have to deal with the current
Yeah.
issue, which is what are we going to do about this? And as I've said, like, I'm asking people to contact the parole board and ask them to reconsider, simply because we don't know what's gone on. And the way they've actually dealt with this has been fundamentally wrong in terms of, like, they have gone out of their way to make it difficult for people, including the victims. Like, one thing which is interesting is a senior politician that I know was is helping with all of this, and he wasn't aware that the victims do not address the parole board directly to give their victim personal statements. It goes through the probation service. Now, if he doesn't know about it, and he is a former minister on this, you can imagine what the situation is going to be like with the public. How are
Sure.
they supposed to know that if they want to have their say, they have to approach the probation service without actually requiring probation? It's not them. They're not the criminals. They're not the people who are sort of in need of probation services. They are the victims. And
Mhm.
yet they're supposed to contact the probation service to have to exercise their rights as victims.
In a democratic society, and one that the government is to work for the people, uh, and for that to happen, it has to be a communication, an open communication level between the people and those government officials in power. And it seems like there is definitely a breakdown, a disconnect there right now in the parole system, in the tariff system, as it's called in UK. And I would certainly hope, as you say, in the short term, there's the issue right now with this release, but may this at least be a step towards the restructuring, the reinvestigating of the tariff system, and possibly the early start of the change, the critical change that sounds like it is needed within that system.
Our system is such that the victims in this case, it's an unusual one. It's very similar to yours in that it isn't just a horrible, grotesque, sexually motivated murder, but it also resulted in the destruction of the life, or in this case, lives of
Yep.
innocent people. Now, in our case, to our shame, these victims have not been asked for their opinions. They haven't been given the opportunity to have their say and essentially let people know this is how Jeffrey Gafoor's crime affected me. This is what it's done to me, and this is what I feel, which they should have the right to do that.
Absolutely.
In your case, when Kenneth Phillips was brought to justice, arrested and tried, did the authorities come to you and say, here's your chance, Ray, to explain what this has done to you, what Kenneth Phillips's actions did to you as well as an innocent person and a victim of his behavior?
Uh, Sadly, absolutely not. That is not something that seems within their ability to try to correct a horrible mistake. It's not their ability to apologize, it seems like. And in fact, I was told by the detective upon my release that, why didn't you just tell us the truth in the beginning? I told him the truth. I didn't commit that murder. But it's funny still, 10 years after my conviction, my sentence to death, and finally my release, that a detective would still have the nerve to tell me, why didn't I just tell him the truth in the beginning? I never lied to him about anything. I was not there at the crime. I had nothing to do with the murder, didn't even know the person that did it. Yet I was the one that he at trial stood there and said I acted guilty. I'd done things that alarmed him in his years as a homicide detective. All straight up lies. But again, I think it's our government's responsibility. Again, when mistakes are made, that's human. We are human. Our government is human. It's run by humans. That is something that should be automatically done. And again, as a victim, as a survivor of a wrongful sentence, there should have been some types of assistance after 10 years in prison to come out and start your life over again. Incredibly, here in America, if I actually served a sentence, a legitimate sentence, and was to be released, there are outside programs and government assistance that's available to a prior parolee. But if you're innocent and get released, you don't qualify for any type of government assistance, any type of reentry programs. There is nothing available to you, even though you served the time.
That's pretty much the same here, although we did manage to get a government scheme at some point to provide assistance, but it didn't do what it should have done, and it's not that useful anymore. In your case, what I was actually getting at was in the actual trial of Kenneth Phillips, did they ask you to give evidence at the trial? Was that taken into account at all?
Kenneth Phillips was a prior felon. Had two convictions already, two felony convictions. He knows how the system works. Kenneth Phillips never went to trial. He took a plea bargain, so there was never a jury trial. That thankfully, at least the victim's mom did not have to testify and see the horrible pictures. It was not put through a trial where that grief is real, visited.
Mm,
He just took a plea bargain, was quietly sentenced to 25 to life for the murder and additional for a sexual assault. He will never be released, and I don't think he'll outlive a 50-some-year sentence. But no, there was never a trial. There was never an opportunity for me to testify. I was never asked to even make any statements in the sentencing part of it. He was just granted a plea bargain by the prosecutor and quietly sent back to prison, where he'll be for the rest of his life.
that is very similar to what happened to the Cardiff Five, except that instead of one person having this nonsense, it's five. They have been waiting now, will be 1990, so 34 years. It's approaching 34 years since the trial that wrongfully convicted the Cardiff Three. They have never been afforded the opportunity to say what they thought. The family of the victim, Lynette White, quite rightly were given the opportunity to do a victim impact statement, which was taken into consideration when setting the tariff. Theirs is also taken into consideration in terms of the parole hearing, but the Cardiff Five have been systematically ignored. It
Yeah.
has got to the point where the parole board tell me they are always open to victims. They want to hear from more and more victims. And the press office at that point had told me they welcomed the Cardiff Five and their families getting in touch, but they would not contact the Cardiff Five directly. They
Huh.
were basically saying, this is the procedure. So it ended up that I was expected to contact them, tell them what the procedure, and arrange for them to contact the people
Yeah,
and get things um, progressing. Whereas the criminal justice system is essentially saying, well, it's not our fault. We're not responsible for informing people. We're not responsible for treating these people as victims or giving them any kind of say
yeah,
over this whatsoever. And now you could say the chickens have come home to roost because everybody knows this. And
yeah,
I've basically been saying to them, look, this is just not on. You are essentially saying, I have to do your job for you. No, I don't.
yeah,
You are responsible. The criminal justice system is responsible for treating the victims of crime. And in this case, the victims of a miscarriage of justice are also victims of crime properly, and
yeah,
give them their say. What harm does it actually do? And it actually makes your system look compassionate and humane, that you
absolutely.
actually care that you did wrong, in that this system did wrong in jailing these people,
Mhm.
in wrecking their lives, and in failing to restore them. How much does it take to say to them, you matter?
Yeah,
And
and
if you don't,
absolutely, yeah,
sorry, I was just
yeah,
going to say, if you don't, then you really can't go around saying this is a victim-centric criminal justice system.
yeah. And absolutely, and again, you want your government to have compassion for all their constituents, all the citizens out there, and to be so cold-hearted, I mean, it's almost like they don't even acknowledge that the Cardiff Five are even victims, and that way they wash their hands of any responsibility.
Mhm.
But in a government that is provided for the citizenry, a government that is made up of citizens, that communication again should be show their compassion, their concern for each individual's rights. I mean, a lot of us might want to not have any interaction with the government. We can live our life without government interference, but the people that need that help of their government should know that that help is there. It's sincere and it will be provided in a timely and considerate manner. And again, if they're overlooking these men and women as victims and say that we're not responsible, then again, that is not being in guidelines of what your responsibility as a government agency is to be or to be able to assure the public of a safety and assure the public of a chance to be heard, assure the public that their concerns and needs are being addressed by their government. And I think all of us would be concerned when things are done with we don't owe you nothing, we don't have to do this, and you don't have anything coming. That's scary when it comes from your government.
What I was going to sort of ask is, the current situation is that there is less than 3 weeks to persuade the parole board to reconsider this and to treat the Cardiff Five and their families as victims, which they are. Both the South Wales Police and even the judge who sentenced Gafoor considered them victims. There's no doubt about it, but the parole board hasn't in its actions.
Yeah.
So what we're asking is people to contact the parole board and essentially say, we want this reconsidered.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely a necessity. And again, not just for the short term, but the long term consequences of the continuation of a government system that lacks the empathy or the concern about victims' voices in decision making that affects all the public safety.
Ray Krone, thank you very much.